Welcome back to another episode of Spiritual Teachers Podcast. With me today is my dear friend Angelica. Angelica is an ancestral medicine keeper, a song carrier, and a facilitator for recovery through reclamation. So welcome on, Angelica.
Good morning. Thank
Good
you for having me
morning.
today. I'm really honored to be here.
Yeah, of course. I'm really excited. We got some amazing topics today, and Angelica has such an incredible journey. So we're really excited to share that with everyone. So we'll start with Angelica's awakening journey. Then we may talk about the power of land tending and recovery, the power of prayer and ancestral medicines, and how that's guided Angelica through her recovery and remembrance of who she is and where she comes from. So some amazing topics today. And so I'd love to invite you to kind of share how the awakening journey all started for you.
Yeah, wonderful. So, my awakening journey, I would say, began when I was 18 years old.
Mm.
I have I grew up in a Christian non-denominational environment through daycares and church with friends. So my family and my internal family system was not so religious, but believed in God and prayer. And my mom would read passages out of the Bible and pray with me every night. So she very much instilled spirituality into my life. And my father was always a believer in a higher power and believed that anyone, anywhere could connect into that connection with Creator.
That's really powerful
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
raised with that kind of knowing, that deep truth.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for that. They were not involved in church or any kind of organized practice
Hmm.
and did send me to daycare when they were working. Once I think I was like 5 or 6. My aunt took care of me a lot when my mom had to go to work. But that also instilled a lot of structure and story within the Christian system. And then eventually into my teen years, I separated from the church and didn't quite feel aligned. And that was when I was about 13 years old
Hmm.
and went through all of the beautiful, fun, rebellious experiences in my teen years. And then come 18, had a journey to Greece and Italy.
Hmm.
And in that in that journey, I connected with the power of the water, and
Mm.
which I'll later in my story share a little bit more of how my relationship with water and the elements have have been a big part of my awakening journey.
Hmm.
At that time, I got baptized in the Aegean Sea by my art teacher, who I found out after leaving high school that he was a devout Christian and went to a public school, so we were not talking about those things at school.
What's the ENGNC?
The Aegean Sea is a sea
Oh, it's a C. Okay, I thought you
like
were
the
saying
waters.
letters. Okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
It's a yeah, beautiful, beautiful waters. We were on a little cove in Tullow, and I later found out that they are known by some for having these sacred healing waters. Didn't know
Okay.
anything about that at the time.
Hmm.
Just had an experience while there and talking about asking many questions and being curious about God and religion and Christianity and Jesus, and decided to get baptized one night after having a really powerful experience at dinner, and said yes to this experience of receiving Christ into my heart again. And it was a really beautiful night. The moon was so bright that night, and we went into the waters, and I got dunked 3 times under the water and came back up. And at that time of life was very confused and quite feeling kind of lost and disconnected from my spirit after going through some traumatic events throughout my teenage years.
Mm-hmm.
And within an instant of coming back above the water and having that blessing and that prayer over me and receiving Christ back into my heart, it felt like the first miraculous moment in my life where it felt like a giant weight was lifted off of my heart and my body.
Wow.
And I felt light again, and I felt my spirit come back into my body, Christ consciousness, this compassion, this love. And I woke up the next day and everything was brighter. I could see colors brighter again and feel like I was engaging with the world again in a whole different way. So I would say that was the first conscious experience of my awakening journey.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, as a kid, did you ever have any gifts that you may have had, like seeing auras or talking to spirits or anything like that, that later on in life you started to understand more?
Not so much. And even to this day, I don't have those particular abilities that you named. I would say that the gifts that I have been given are the clairsentience, the
Hmm.
feeling, and the knowing.
Right.
I grew up in the country outside of Central Valley, Fresno, in Madera Ranchos, and I really feel that growing up where I did and having a lot of time outside, it was a very small town. I'm an only child, and so I have many cousins and extended family that I spent time with. And I also spent a fair amount of time by myself and playing out in the yard. And we had this big, beautiful tree in our front yard. And I believe it was there where I was really building, like reconnecting with my intuitive senses and my
Hmm.
physical body and the land and the trees and the natural world.
Yeah.
There wasn't any awareness of anything like, seeing spirits or speaking to spirits. Not until down the line. It wasn't until I think I was 21 or 22 when I had my first experience with having connection with another spirit that was not God or Jesus. And I
Hmm.
was praying to my grandmother
Oh, wow.
and speaking to my grandmother. And then I
Hmm.
had connection with my grandmother's spirit. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So after this baptism, where did the journey take you from there?
Then I got really involved with the Christian church again, and I came back and was Jesus freak and was like just so stoked on Jesus and got really involved with the church for, I would say it was maybe 2 years. And then I kind of came back to, wait a minute. This something isn't quite aligning for me in this dogma. And it was honestly just, it was that clear sense. It was a feeling.
Uh-huh.
It was a feeling one day when I loved praise and worship. I love singing. I love song and music. And that's also been a big part of my healing journey. And in all I can say is there was just a day and we were praying and I just got this ping. And I don't recall what was being said in the moment. I think there was also a reading and something was like, this isn't aligning and
Mm-hmm.
this doesn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
And I left the church.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and let's see, from there, um, I carried on with life and ended up in a relationship that was an unhealthy relationship. There was alcohol, and that's another thing I'll talk about in my journey. You know, there's been a lot of struggles with marijuana and alcohol and addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that not a lot of people in my life were aware of because, you know, I was always a really bright child. Loved, you know, in high school I was voted most kind, which is a fun fact of my history as
That's
like an
pretty
18
spot
year
on.
I was like, wow, that's how my community sees me. And I see myself, you know, as a very kind person. And underneath there was some internal things that I was working with in regards to my own self-love and also some of the traumas that I had experienced that continued to resurface in ways that I didn't quite understand. Then that led me to relationships that were not healthy, coping with alcohol, coping with marijuana. So through that, I was then led to yoga and not quite feeling aligned with the dogma of Christianity, but understanding that there was something more. I had been aware of yoga at about 18 and a half. It was in college. I
Mm-hmm.
started a yoga practice and a class and a dance conditioning class.
Was it Hatha?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I was in this relationship for maybe 2 years. I think it was 22 when I went to this particular class at a studio in Fresno and had another experience of that awakening, the coming home to myself. And through my recovery journey have come to see how the pattern of coping that my physical body and my spirit learned was disassociating. And I was unaware for so many years that I was like coming in and out of these disassociative states,
Mm.
even when not you know, in extreme danger, there was still the switches in my brain and my body were telling me that I was not safe. And in this yoga class, I came into child's pose at the end of the class, and I recall this experience of breathing and taking this breath and realizing I had been so disconnected from my physical body
Yeah.
for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
Um and then I got into yoga. And then I
So
go
with
ahead.
that experience, can you share a little bit with people maybe that haven't had experiences like this? What did it feel like? Did you just have that knowing? Or was there a mantra playing that sparked something? Was there anything like that happening that you think could have activated that? Or was it just like the yoga had cleared some channels, some energy started flowing, and there was like I'm just curious how that, can you describe a little more what happened?
Sure. Yeah, I would say it was the physical practice. You know, the the vinyasa, the movement of the breath and the body and all of that that had brought me back into a more centered space in my physical body.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the power of the breath. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the power of the breath. I don't recall that we were saying any particular mantras during that practice, but we had gone through this flow and it was at the end of the class, so it was like an hour long class,
Mm-hmm.
and it was that the sensation of all of, I think, you know, the combination that that beautiful practice does of bringing the union, you know, the union of mind, body, and spirit through the movement, through the
Mm-hmm.
breath, and reconnecting. And so it just brought me back, and I was realizing, oh my gosh, I've been so disconnected from my body. Like
Uh-huh.
how did I here I am. Oh, this physical body, what a gift. And
Yeah.
and I'm like, I need to do more of this.
Yeah.
And so then I ended up getting into a, a teacher training in vinyasa yoga and therapeutic yoga. And that was in 20 2020. I mean, no, that was, sorry, that was 20. Anyways, it doesn't matter. It was like 23. That was like over a decade ago, I think.
Right. Right.
So yeah, here we are. Here we are.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Beautiful. So yeah, I mean, for yoga's so powerful in those beginning stages, I believe. For me it was, at least. It just opens up so much and moves so much energy and aligns the channels and opens up stuck energy, especially, a lot of people hold energy in their hips or in their shoulders. And if those in everyday life, even if you're going to the gym, those movements and those channels aren't really being activated and aligned in those ways that yoga does that. And so it's no surprise to me that it's such a powerful technology, because it just opens that up, and then people start to potentially cry for no reason, or feel these knowings and have these sensations, right? Of, oh wow, this is my body. Here I am. Like,
Mhm.
that's so powerful. That's such a powerful experience to have, to be able to feel your body again and to feel safe, that, okay, here I am. I don't have to be dissociated out here somewhere.
Mhm. Yeah, that was the first, and it was subtle but still very powerful in regards to coming back into my body and and feeling a sense of peace. You know, it was this deep sense of serenity.
Hmm.
And that ultimately led me to a more empowered state that led me to leave the relationship that I was in, and I was able to see, oh, this is not healthy, and I can make a choice to step away from this and come back into a healthier state of being, a more whole place of being, and had a great experience in my teacher training and was blessed with world-renowned teachers. And in the therapeutic training, laughter yoga had also led me into this huge release. You know, that was like a more powerful, like vibrant experience was during the teacher training, doing 5 minutes of laughter yoga with a group of people. And what later someone was like, that was a Kundalini awakening. That was like your Kundalini awakening.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
like full on sobbing, energy shooting out of my hands and my feet. All I could do was lay flat on the earth, and I couldn't even I couldn't do anything else. My teacher guided me to try and come into a child's pose if it felt comfortable, and I was like, nope, just
this is this
starfish on the earth.
this is me now. This is
This
where
is
I
me
live.
now. And it was beautiful, and there are so many tools and guides, and we find what is resonant for our spirit and for us, and at some point in time down the road of my life, I began to be curious about the medicine of my ancestors and the the lineage of the roots of my ancestry. There were many years of working at a yoga studio, and I began to teach, and I really enjoyed that practice. And and I continued to dive more deeply into the history and the lineage, and it always felt really light to me in the at least that we still went through the lineage that I was studying through is Patanjali, and it I think I had some difference in was like some of the westernized form of yoga.
Mhm.
And I had the honor of working in a studio that did really honor the deeper lineage and spirituality of yoga and the science and the spiritual aspects of it. And I started to become uncertain if I could honor it in the greatest way that it deserved. And not
Mm.
coming from that culture, I just chose to step away from presenting myself as a yoga instructor. I was like, I think I'm far from that. I think there are many things that I can share with others from this practice that have really helped me. And I continue to weave some of those practices in my own one-on-one healing work over the years. But I decided to start looking at my own system and my own history. And I'm just trying to recall that moment of when that was, and that shift and why I made that shift. Yeah, I think it was through my journeys of being a bit nomadic
Mm.
for a number of years, and ways of life and cultures that I had not been aware of, that were indigenous cultures that were closer to my my familial background, were of interest to me. It was meeting other people, other teachers that had a deep sense of authenticity and clarity in who and what they were working with, and
Mm.
even where they came from, and honoring their ancestors and honoring their lineage and honoring their family and the lands that they come from. um and and yeah, it was really the counterculture that kind of was like the door that opened up the counterculture of the transformational conscious community.
Right.
Was the doorway into what led me more deeply into my own ancestral medicines
Hmm.
in ways that I had not been exposed to before in the town that I grew up in.
Okay,
Uh,
so for those people that are just listening, what would be what is your ancestry? You're part Mashika, right?
so I'm all the colors of the rainbow.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I'm a multicultural mix, and I grew up identifying as Mexican,
Hmm.
and my mother's family is from Monterrey, Nuevo León, in northern Mexico,
Hmm.
and she was born in Texas, and then they landed in Fresno shortly after my mother was born for work and were farm workers. My father's family is from Arizona and Mexico, and it wasn't until the journey that I'm about to share more about that I learned that, we're half Indigenous and then there's Spanish. And so really it was just the Spanish and then unknown Indigenous roots
Mm.
that I was aware of.
Hmm.
And my mother had given me some beadwork for my grandfather in 2020, which was a big year for me in reconnecting more deeply with my ancestral medicines and even the deeper connection of who I am. And that was during a TP meeting that was ran by a Lakota roadman. But during that same chapter, my mom had given me beadwork for my grandfather, and one of the pieces was Wixarika,
Hmm.
also known as the Huichol tribe from Mexico. It was their work. And she shared with me that she did not know where these things came from and did not know any of the history, but they were from my grandfather. And she had had them since she was a child.
Wow.
And I had never seen them in my life. And I was like, wow, these are so beautiful. And the other pieces were braid ties, beaded deer skin that had thunderbirds on them,
Oh,
turquoise
wow.
and black, and she would wear them in her hair.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I also didn't know particularly what the symbol was until later. I was just following the breadcrumbs and praying to my ancestors for guidance. And yeah, oh, so on my dad's side, we're part Yaqui.
Okay.
And, my father was the youngest in his family, and he was unaware of being Yaqui.
Hmm.
And that's none of that was spoken for the reasons of, you could get your head cut off and you could get killed for being Yaqui if you say you're Yaqui in any to the wrong person.
Hmm.
And it was no longer, historically, it was no longer okay to be practicing a lot of the things that they practice. So my grandmother was a curandera. She was a healer, and she's been a big guide for me. And the ways that she learned were not particularly passed on like consciously and spoken about. She would do the things that she did in the kitchen. She had a garden. She worked with herbs. She worked with her hands. And my father always said I had her healing hands.
Hmm.
And so I had been, years ago, I studied Thai massage and did a lot of body work and believed that she was also a big part of guiding me to those medicines of healing with our hands and
For sure.
also connection with the plants.
Hmm.
And so that connection actually came during yoga and my journey with yoga. I was opening up to prayer in a different way than I had learned in church, in the Christian church.
Hmm.
And I had grown up with just, I prayed to Jesus, and that was just what I did. I prayed to God. And one day I just decided to pray to my grandma. No one told me to do anything. I just was thinking about her and thinking about, the yoga, thinking about Thai yoga, and thinking about her as a healer, and decided to speak with her spirit. And I'm like, wow, well, there's all of these other spirits and gods and elements, and why not talk to my grandmother?
Yeah.
And so I just asked for her guidance, and she came to me. And she came to me in a healing session. I was receiving a massage with a friend of mine, and she shared with me that she had a message for me at the end of the massage, and it was from my grandmother.
Wow.
And she read me, she said, I'm being called right now to take out my phone and read this poem. It was wild. And she
Whoa.
started reading this grandmother poem that is talking about that was saying, child, I am here with you. I am always guiding you, and I am
Mhm.
always with you. And I just remember crying. I was
Yeah.
in tears at the awe of the profundity of the connection that we have with our ancestors and our guides. And it was just this direct response. And
That's so beautiful.
yeah, 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 I'll pause there.
Yeah, that's really special, and I know for myself, I've been lately looking for that, to connect with my grandmother. She was my favorite person, and she passed 4 years ago almost. And I'm, I just want to talk to her again. I want to see if she has anything to share or, how she's doing wherever she is. So
Hmm.
it's such a beautiful gift to be able to connect in that way.
Hmm. Yeah, she's with you.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I always felt a little bit like the black sheep of my family. And I grew up, I don't really know much Spanish, and most of my family spoke Spanish. And so I'm actually just starting this journey with learning Spanish. And so connecting with a lot of my family was really challenging. My
Mm,
grandparents only spoke Spanish. I don't know if they may have spoken other language prior to that on my father's side, but I felt a little bit, I was very disconnected from our culture
mhm,
comparatively to some of my other family members. And so I did have a deep desire after exploring yoga, after exploring just I've just always had this curiosity for spiritual practices, for other cultures. I really enjoyed anthropology in college and just studying what humans were doing all over the earth, how they were connecting with their environment, how they were connecting with the elements, these different spiritual ways. And it's really been apparent that it was me seeking this deeper connection also with where our family comes from.
mhm,
And there has been a lot of Spanish influence, and so there's less connection with the indigenous roots of our ancestry, at least in my cousins and my aunts and stuff connect more with the evolution of how Spanish influence began to shift and evolve our practices. And for me, I was really drawn to the indigenous arts and medicine.
mhm,
And and I believe that was through the just the desire to connect with my ancestors and praying for their guidance,
mhm,
and then intuitively, listening and following what my heart was being called to, which eventually led me to the medicine of the hikuri, the medicine of peyote, which, if I don't know for certain, and if my grandfather is Wixarika, and where he clearly had relations with the artwork that my mother shared with me, they work closely with that medicine,
mhm,
and it's that spirit is a great teacher and guide. And so through different invitations to ceremony, that's what led me to work with that medicine
Hmm.
and begin to also work with within the Lakota tradition and lineage.
So you started going down to Mexico and working with the Wixarika people?
Yes. So let's see, it was actually at a festival that I had met a woman who mentioned being connected with Yaqui teachers and learning that we're part Yaqui Apache. I did not have connection with that I was aware of. Did not have any connection with people that really knew a whole lot about the Yaqui culture.
And they're in Arizona, right?
Arizona, Mexico, I mean, they traversed from northern Mexico all the way up to Arizona and as did many tribes, they were very nomadic and so they were
Right.
moving around a lot.
And they're do they have a reservation now in Arizona?
Yes,
Okay.
there's a reservation. I think there's actually one down outside of San Diego. And then there's one in Arizona and then Chihuahua, I think down in Mexico. Uh,
Beautiful. Beautiful.
and I'm still excited and just being patient with connecting more with particularly the Yaqui culture.
Hmm.
Um, and slowly but surely, it's a
Hmm.
lot to integrate, little by little.
Yeah.
The
So this woman at the festival, she connected you with the Wixarika people, or was it more of the Apache
With
people?
the Wixarika people,
Okay.
and so I had been hearing stories about the blue deer, which is the spirit of the peyote and the cosmology that the Wixarika carry and believe in is guided by the blue deer. And so I had been hearing some stories about the blue deer, and then this woman had invited me to a ceremony and
Beautiful.
reached out and said they were having a ceremony at Blue Deer Ranch. And I said, okay, well, this is,
That's an amazing name.
yeah, this is synchronistic. And I went, and that's where I met one of my teachers, Abuela Chica Wasochi, and decided to go and study indigenous medicine with her down in Guadalajara.
Hmm.
And then that led me to the Wixárika.
Hmm.
And she works closely with the Wixárika and is part Mayan, but she grew up in sitting in ceremony with the Wixárika and then invited us to go on pilgrimage with them. And so then, that was optional. It was also very clear that that would be a commitment to go on pilgrimage for 5 years. And, I really respect the different protocols that I've learned in different indigenous traditions. There's definitely especially in the West, but many other cultures, a lot of spiritual tourism, like cultural tourism, and I've done my best to really unlearn that way and to really honor the people and the traditions and the lands and the medicines that have been guiding us
Hmm.
and have really helped me to heal. And so yeah, these a lot of different indigenous traditions require these different commitments, right? And the devotion to the path.
Hmm.
So I still feel like a baby in these ways and am still unlearning many things and clearing out the space and the consciousness to bring back the remembrance of the original blueprint of this earth and of my own spirit. So these medicines and these teachers have really been such a gift and great guides for bringing back that truth,
Hmm.
uh, and that clarity.
Hmm. And I just had a question come through
Sure.
because not many people now, peyote is endangered, and very few people carry that medicine that, are openly sharing about it, at least in America. And so, can you share anything about any of the experiences you had on that medicine? Because it seems like with peyote, it's quite different for different people and their experiences. It's not as entheogenic as a mushroom, like a deeper mushroom journey or as a ayahuasca journey, from what I've heard from other people. Can you share anything about your experiences with it?
Yeah, from the experiences that I've had, they all speak to people differently.
Yeah.
And so, you know, one person may have a completely different experience than the other. My partner is he has the gift of of the visions, of seeing spirits and energies and very, very clearly. And that's very different than me. I think this is also a muscle. And I mean, it's part of the mystery that I don't know. I don't know that I can answer that question entirely. One of my teachers said that she was sitting in with the medicine quite often for a number of years, 6 or 7 years, and it wasn't until that seventh year that she had a vision
Mm, okay.
that she was seeing or being communicated, seeing into another realm.
Hmm.
And that's also through learning how to build relationship with the fire, in the traditions within many traditions that work with peyote, there's there's also this deep respect and honor with grandfather fire
Yeah.
and fire
Hmm.
and all of the elemental spirits and beings.
Hmm.
Most ancient earth traditions, earth-based traditions talk about this. It's woven into the cosmology of everything that is. It,
Yeah.
it starts with the building of the relationship with tobacco. And there's rituals of praying with the tobacco. You pray with the tobacco and build a relationship with the tobacco. You offer that tobacco to a plant, you offer that tobacco to the fire, and it's a spirit, and
Hmm.
these spirits all have different ways of helping us
Hmm.
to enter into different states, enter into different places and realms, um and so I think some of that is also dependent, like the experience that one may have is also dependent on the relationship that they have with the earth, with the elements, with the spirits around them. you know, it is very different than my experiences when I was involved in the transformational festival and the new age scene. And then I was exploring with psychedelics and taking mushrooms and LSD and having some really profound experiences. And I will say that the experiences that I've had with peyote and the teachings that have been shared with me from these ancestral lineages are very different.
Hmm.
And it's there's a way, and I have found that these ways have been given by these spirits, and taught to us on how to walk in a good way with all of these things.
Yeah.
Because I do think that, it's the psychedelic world, there's so much being shared about the power of how it can change our minds, and they are here to ultimately help us become healthy, well, vital people.
Mhm.
And I believe there's a lot more than just the human experience of us being these powerful beings, and we can get really lost out there too. And there's
Yeah.
like all kinds of forces and energies. And, I've had to put myself back together and find all of these pieces that got very fragmented in the journey of exploring these plant medicines.
Hmm.
And not knowing, it was just a not knowing coming from a culture where you can order something online and like take it and have this experience. And I was there at one point and was ultimately seeking something more. I was seeking something deeper than the culture that I grew up in.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I think a big portion of it in terms of difference of just being in a festival scene or doing it quote unquote recreationally, right, is that it's looked at as a sacred medicine and it's done with extreme deep intention, right?
Mhm.
Where there's a deep respect for these medicines and when when these teachers come together to serve, they're holding that energy, right? Where they're just like, this is not just for you to go on a journey like a trip, right? This is for your healing. This is for you to understand deeper, to connect deeper, to really just become more connected to the earth, to nature, to this reality and the truth of it versus like just exploring, right? Just like trying something just to try it because people are doing it. And I've met people that's been life changing and life altering for them, but that was what they needed to go through at that moment. But it's done in a very intentional way with the ways that you're describing,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? Is there anything you think would be good to add to that?
Well, you mentioned the the plant in its current state. A lot of as many of our sacred plants are being abused. And I think that comes back to, the cultural the consciousness of wanting all of the things, like what's the new hottest medicine out there? What's the new thing? Oh, I need that. I need that. And it's so easy for people to, and I'm not above that. It's still I still live in Western society, and it's a constant managing of and looking at, okay, what am I doing here? What is it that I'm wanting? What is it that I think that I need?
Hmm.
And it's important to talk about the fact that I mean a lot of what's going on with peyote is also the fight with the lands. There's a lot of ranching, industrialized farming that have put the sacred lands of the Wirikuta, which is the sacred land that the peyote comes from, in danger. Many acres being bulldozed for ranching or farming. So that's one factor. And then it's also the black market and things being sold and desired from people that just are not aware of the effects of their actions
Hmm.
and the reality of the sacredness of these medicines and the protocols that that are in place to also honor those medicines.
Hmm.
It's not just for an experience, it's for healing,
Right.
for remembrance. It's for prayer, it's
Hmm.
for ritual. And yeah, I'm really grateful for the teachers and guides that have continued to help me to remember how to carry these things in a good way. One of my teachers, the teacher that I spoke of who brought me to the Wixarika, um, she shared, you always have everything you need, even when you think that you have nothing. That plant that's right behind you, wherever you're sitting on the earth, is likely exactly what it is that you need. And maybe it looks like a weed, and you're
Mm.
like, what am I going to do with this? And and I think it's really easy to get caught up in thinking that we need more. And what one of the things that these medicines have continued to show me is the power that is within, including yoga, including Christianity and prayer, the power that we have within, and also the power of our mind and the stories that we're telling ourselves. And the Wixarika, the Lakota, like the cosmology, the belief systems that they have, the what some people consider mythology. I believe that is what we creates our reality.
Hmm.
And even in the new age, it's like the stories that we're telling ourselves, rewiring our brains, reframing our mindset with something more positive. And what it's same but different, and there's like a deeper layer in the ancient traditions of this world. And I believe that's just that deeper thread of the relationship with the spirits
Hmm.
and our Mother Earth and all of creation. It's not just me in my mind and I'm going to do breath work, and breath work's amazing and so powerful, and then be like, oh my gosh, I am like this ultra powerful creative being, and we are. And how do we relate with all of our relations inside of that place, and how are we in service also for all of life?
Right.
Yeah.
I think you brought up a really good point because in today's society, it's who can have the bigger house, who can have the nicer car, who can have the most money, who can, be the first one to get a jet, you know, and that's from what I've learned, the self path, the path of self, where it's just thinking about what the self wants, and then the other path is the path of service to others. And it sounds like what you were mentioning is the path to others, to the path of service to others, because the path of service to others leads us to it's not as challenging because we have community, we have people supporting us, there's people walking alongside us, if not literally, then virtually, right? It's like this is a much easier path to get to the destination, right? And there is no destination. The journey is the destination for, for most people. But the path of self, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that path is what's causing so much harm on the planet right now.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, one thing that's helped me, because I mean, at some point I felt so just guilty and shameful for all of the things that where I was coming from, like all these systems, and then I was like, I'm a terrible person. I'm doing these things, and it's important to look at how it's important to look at how we're affecting all that's happening around us, in our own actions, and be real about that, and be easy with ourselves on the journey. We live in modern times, and it's taken me many, many, many years, and will continue to be my life's journey of continuing to remember how to walk in a good way. And one thing I want to share with everyone listening is that it's never too late to do the next best thing that you can do. It's never too late to make amends, um to say a prayer. What I felt so disconnected from my ancestors, but they were always right there, and I think that's one of the biggest things messages that I'd like to share with everyone is that we all have this lineage that we're connected to, that we were born from, and again, there's many, many stories out there and cosmologies, and some say, well, then how and what do we believe in? Being someone of mixed nationality, mixed racial race, that there's all kinds of different stories, and so what I've done is just continue to pray, ask for guidance for my ancestors, listen and be open to something that may even seem out of the ordinary. And for me, I realized something isn't, I'm not liking the outcome of where my life is going right now. And
Mm,
how, and I was on that train of, okay, I'm on this spiritual train. I'm trying all these different things, feeling good sometimes, but then feeling completely lost. And what my life was missing was also elders. I
mhm,
was lacking teachers and elders, and guidance from elders, and listening to them and asking questions, um and through prayer, I've been guided to many different ancestors that I wouldn't have even, everything is an ancestor.
mhm.
Ultimately, it's like
Yeah,
the elements, the rocks, the fire, the trees, the water.
yeah.
And as I shared in the very beginning of this story, the water has healed me over and over and over again. And I didn't even realize, the spirit of the water, and this deeper connection that I have with the waters, and the power that she has. And even in the Wixarika tradition, the Lakota tradition, the water is revered, and 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 a part of all of the rituals that are done, and a huge part of the cosmology of that. And
Even in the teepee ceremony, they use a water drum, right?
hmm
Which is like a
yeah,
metal drum that has a deer skin over the top, and there's water inside, and it makes this amazing sound of boing boing. And
hmm
it's one of the most beautiful instruments that I've ever heard.
it's so beautiful, so powerful. And the water, we don't drink water in until a specific time of the night. We're not depending on who's holding the meeting, you abstain from the water. And there's a reason for that, and how we're relating with that spirit and relating with the peyote and the particular time of the night. And they're very different energies. And it's a very special moment when the water comes into the teepee,
Hmm.
and we get to all drink that water, and the water woman prays over that water. And it's a very profound, beautiful experience, and remembrance of holding that holding that spirit as sacred,
Yeah.
and connecting with that spirit in a much more deep way. And yeah, that's definitely been a that particular time in within the TP has been a huge teacher, and it just has really, I mean, that's where I said my perspective has changed in regards to what was happening in these experiences when I was having healing in the waters. And
Hmm.
I knew it was, I'd always had this deep connection with water. I don't quite have words for that in this moment, but what it has shown me, it's far beyond what I even realized in the moment. And, I believe in these higher consciousnesses, like Jesus, the Christ consciousness, and Christ consciousness being present in the moment of me having this miraculous experience. And I also believe that it was the spirit of the water, and it was
Mm.
also the union of the two,
Mm.
and the water is just so highly intelligent, and carries memory. And we hear that from ancient cultures, the memory of the water can carry, you know, limitless amounts of information. And there's even studies being, scientific studies now that are proving the how water is a supercomputer. It's like
Sure.
this supercomputer that has all of these molecules and chips that can hold information, which is a whole other podcast. But
Yeah, I'm really curious. You mentioned the spirit of water. Have you interacted with that spirit? Have you seen it, or is it more of a knowing and a remembrance?
yeah, I mean, we women are womb carriers, they're water carriers. Like, we are the water. We are we are the divine form and matter, like mixed with all of the other beautiful elements of fire and earth, but predominantly water. I mean, all, not just women, but women hold a different key than men do. We grow life inside of our very wombs. I Again, for me, in the way that I relate with spirits is not particularly seeing at this time on my journey. It's experiencing the power through feeling, through
Mm.
song. these different songs that have been gifted to me, these different vibrations. Often I get these different songs that come when I'm by water.
Beautiful.
So I experience that spirit through that form. I believe that these spirits, these elemental guides move with and through us.
For sure.
And so, when I feel really disconnected at times when I've been really depressed, I eventually, was led to a friend that led me back to the waters, and I remembered how sacred the waters are, and that when I'm like disoriented or confused, I can go to the spring
Hmm.
and commune with the sweet waters and go bathe in the spring and have my entire system cleared, just have this huge cleansing and then come
Hmm.
out of it feeling renewed. I think so many of us can relate with that, regardless of however we identify spiritually. We can relate with, sitting and looking at the ocean and having this extreme sense of serenity, or getting in a cold plunge. And, like the original is just like you go and you get into a cold river
Hmm.
and like there it is. And you're just like, woo, invigorated, and your whole system goes through a reboot.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it brings up the importance of praying over your water, right? The waters that we drink, the waters that we bathe in. Every time I have a glass of water, I'll do Reiki on it. I'll bless the water to be in the highest vibration for my mind, body, soul, and spirit. And, there's so much that the water can do for us when we connect with that spirit and really love on it, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I know her as a feminine energy and spirit, but I think all of the spirits, all of our guides, just like we do, because we are these emanations of them, like to be honored. We want to be seen. We want to be respected.
Hmm.
We want to be often like it feels good to receive gratitude for our presence, and they want that too. And in the traditions that I'm learning from and carrying, there's offerings in every single one of them.
Yeah.
The offering of, whether it's a song, whether it's a prayer, whether it's the tobacco, whether, there's an array of different things, flowers, fruits, vegetables, like a meal cooked for and then given in honor. We just went through the Dia de los Muertos, and the honoring of those that have passed,
Right.
and the honoring of those spirits. I'm definitely remembering the importance of that.
Right.
And it's like the veneration, like really uplifting their spirits, because we're all connected.
Right.
And when we do that for them, they're just right there doing it for us.
Hmm.
And it's in that remembrance, like, my ancestors have saved my life. These medicines have saved my life, truly. The songs that have been passed to me saved my life. And the songs are also invocations, just as the mantras of India, and for the yogis, it's, the same in these different indigenous traditions as well, with particular songs sung at particular times to invoke the energies of these different spirits that can help us.
Hmm.
And I really had to humble myself to the reality that I need help. You
Right, right,
know?
right,
I'm like,
right.
yeah, I got this. I'm just gonna go do this yoga practice. I got this, which is, yeah, true. But then, then I also wasn't honoring all of the other things. So then I just kept falling on my own feet, like
Hmm.
over and over and over. Not to say I won't keep falling. And then I'm remembering that there's so much more than just me trying to make it through a practice or make it through a breath work or do the thing. There's also ease in the remembrance and the honoring because we have so many guides and so many ancestors here with us. And even if we think that we don't have connection to our ancestral medicines, we always do. And, no matter what has happened in the history of our people, war, colonization, like all of these terrible things that continue to happen on this planet, it can never take away the strength and the resilience that is always within us.
Hmm.
Our ancestors, they're all here. They're right
Right.
here, and we can connect with them at any given point in time.
I have a, I
And
have a, I have a quick question for you on that note. You mentioned prayer a few times, right? And I'm just curious, with prayer, have you noticed that your prayer, the way that you pray, has evolved or shifted from that time that you were practicing Christianity to how you pray now?
great question. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I mean I believe that our life and how we are co-creating, it's all a prayer. We are the prayer,
Hmm.
and then we get to also make these prayers, which looks very different. And it I'm learning also just the limitations that the English that English has on all of these different traditions, because the definitions for many words in a few of the different languages. I don't speak them fluently. As I said, I don't even speak Spanish fluently. And what I'm learning is the definitions are so vast
Hmm.
and often very poetic. And even, water. It's like there are many names and different emanations of water and even the spirit of the water. So I'm just trying to culminate a way to say this, and how it's being expressed is, it's like life is the ceremony. We sit in ceremony to remember how to, within an organized container, because there's a lot of power in that, right? And there's particular rituals of protection for different purposes and healing for different purposes. And in that space, we can create a really, really powerful field, particularly maybe if there's somebody that is ill, to send healing to them.
And that's
And
that's a really powerful form of prayer, right?
a really powerful form of prayer. And that's where there's a little bit of a difference in like the organization of something versus like, mm, how do I, yeah, versus one person trying to do healing on someone. But then there's like, you have the lineage, and it's also remembering like the power of the lineage, because it's connected to spirits and a lineage of healers all the way back there. Like they say, 7 generations back, 7 generations forward, and beyond. When we're singing particular songs that have been alive and practiced for thousands of years, the spirits know, like there's a particular that's been sung so many times. And when we bring consciousness to that thought over and over and over and over again, it becomes a real thing. And it's believed in, it's in the same way that there are particular rituals that have been done a particular way and that power increases and then it's, hopefully utilized for the good. And there's also other things happening and people are not utilizing these powers for the greater good of all. So
One
I'm
thing,
kind of veering here from the prayer particular question with how my prayer has evolved. I think just my understanding, the experiential, like the way that I see it, it's not just, oh, there's this one prayer I'm going to read.
mm,
Though there are prayers like in all traditions, it's like the power of the word and reciting things. There's also the making of a prayer when you're like making a bracelet, and people are or weaving or even the weaving of rugs, that at one point in time and still today is a form of prayer.
mm-hmm.
And a friend of
Yeah.
mine just recently said to me, I just moved into a new house and I couldn't meet up with her. And she said, that some say that your home is the first ceremony. And that's how you create your home and how you take care of your home and your family. It all moves from that point outwards, and so it's important to be taking care and tending to our home space, just as it is our own physical temple of our physical body.
Mm-hmm.
Um, People dance, right, as a form of prayer, and so there's just so many different forms, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really interesting because I think my perspective of prayer has also shifted in the last 10, 15 years as well, because it's like we can infuse prayer into a crystal, we can infuse it into tobacco, which can then be smoked in a pipe, which the smoke brings the prayer up to Creator to be received, or to the spirits that we're praying to, our ancestors. The prayer can look like just sitting in front of the fire and envisioning your life, right? It can be an affirmation like, I am strong, I am resilient, I am aligned with my highest timeline. For me, those kind of prayers feel really powerful and really impactful because I'm affirming and then I'm feeling that energy, right? Of it already has happened, it's already done, right? When I learned that affirmations and things like that were also a form of prayer, I just started to explore with that, right? To see what was most effective, right? I didn't have to go to any deity or God. I could, even though I am through this experience, but I didn't have to pick a specific deity. I could just say it to the Almighty, right? The Great Spirit. There's so many names for God, right? And to the universe, however people want to say it. But yeah, I mean, it's such a interesting topic because I know that prayer is something that people, a lot of society associates with one way, but there's a huge array of ways to pray.
hmm hmm Yeah,
Yeah.
and I imagine my own journey, it will continue to deepen and evolve
Yeah.
as I continue to peel back the layers and yeah, and continue to come into deeper remembrance.
Yeah.
And it's profound, that's the mystical, the mysterious aspects of the world that we live in and these bodies that we live in and these realms are pretty divine. It's just I
Mhm.
don't even have words in
Yeah.
this
Yeah,
moment.
as you were speaking, it just made me really think about how my lineage, very few of my ancestors were healers or medicine men or women, or but they still, as part of the culture, it was like infused into that, to the world, into the world they lived in, right? Herbs were used on a regular basis, and my family's from Russia, and they were collecting mushrooms and making tinctures, and pickling their food for the winter and making jams. And it was like all these things that now in the Western world very few people are making their own of, and going and actually harvesting from the earth in a way that's honoring and in a good way, like you said, right? And so those aspects I'm really grateful for, and strive to continue to keep doing, and all that's a form of alchemy, right? It's a form of working with the land, getting really potent nutrients and minerals and plants for the body, and doing it with love and prayer. And so, there's those aspects. But while you were speaking earlier, it just made me think of like how I'm so grateful for the journey that spirit has led me on in this body, in this lifetime, of finding these different teachers, connecting with these different ancient ways that have been around for thousands and thousands of years, that I get to experience and be a part of. And it also, one huge aspect was reincarnation for me on my awakening. Like when I recognized that and connecting to different lifetimes, when I was Native American, when I was from an area of Colombia, and saw myself as a some sort of shaman in Chichen Itza, right? These kind of things, and remembering that it's not just this lifetime's ancestors. It's all connected. It's all there's only very little difference between any human on Earth, and the skin color and the ways that we look really doesn't determine, from my experience, what spirit leads me to, and what I'm so called to do in this the reincarnation,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's fascinating. Some of my family members are just like, "What are you doing? You're off doing what? Where? With who? Why?
You're
Like,
going to
why
the
would you
desert
do
and not
this?"
eating food and water for 4 days. What are you doing?
And why is a great thing to ask ourselves? Like, why is it that we're drawn to doing whatever it is that we're doing? And I was talking to one of my uncles, and I was sharing about the one of the chiefs that I work with and pray with, and who's been guiding me and so many others in the world to this deeper path, and remembrance, and to our ancestors. And he is like, I don't understand. So you're sitting in a teepee with a Peruvian man, and he does this, and he holds different traditions and different medicines, and he holds multiple different medicine bundles, and they've been passed down to him. And his ancestors were like, you need to take this medicine to the north, and he came here to Turtle Island, to the United States, to bring his medicine up here, and then met a Lakota chief, and Chief Leonard Crow Dog, and got passed down his medicine bundle and said, I want you to carry this medicine, and taught him how to showed him how to work with that medicine in their ways, and to continue to carry these ways on and share it with others. And and then the football game goes off and he just, okay, see you later. I gotta get to this football game. And he goes to the game. And you know, I share this because you're talking about these lifetimes, these different lifetimes that we had that we're connected to, and these different timelines. And I started to wonder. I'm like, well, what I was wanting to narrow down my studies because I'm kind of like, okay, well, I'm pilgrimaging with the Wixarika. I've been brought to the teepee and am learning the Lakota ways, and have taken steps to also devote my past to the rites of passage in the Lakota tradition. And currently, I haven't spoken about this on the podcast yet, but currently I'm in an initiation in an African tradition that is called Ifa, and it's from the Yoruba peoples, Nigeria, ancient earth wisdom practice. And I never really thought I would. I'm like, I don't want another thing. Wait, what's happening? And it came into my life. I was no longer seeking any of the things, but I was praying. It wasn't about like I'm looking for this thing. It's just please show me my next step on my path of life that is in alignment with all of life and my ancestors and how I can best serve. And it's no longer about me, it's about being guided by higher forces and me listening to the guidance. And and Ifa is a really fascinating practice because it carries divination, which so does, my chief is also, he divines with the coca leaves and that sacred plant. And within Ifa, it was they divine on your life. When you're born into that tradition, if you're born into it, you're born with your life reading that gives you kind of a understanding of what you're here to do.
Yeah, like your
And
purpose, right?
yeah, your destiny
Hmm.
and these different, even what professions you may get into, like your career, these gifts that you're born with, and then how to develop them, and also how to avert negating forces. And I'll circle back around to why I'm getting into this, but you know, I started to wonder, like, why Ifa? This doesn't, I don't, never identified so much with, definitely not in this physical body, being African.
Hmm.
But when I did a DNA test, I learned that I actually have a lot of, I'm like half Indigenous American in what it names it in this particular test. And then there was Nigerian,
Mm.
Egyptian, Sierra Leonean, and there's all of these other threads
Hmm. From the
that
Spanish
are,
side.
and perhaps, I mean, then there's Spanish, then there's Portuguese and my Spanish roots, and likely, with the diaspora and all of the different weavings of cultures in Brazil. And I say this also because even though my uncle's white, you're not, he said you're not native to me, and why would you practice these things? And it was just an insight, to how far removed so many of us have come from the remembrance that we're all indigenous of some land somewhere,
Hmm.
even if, like the I've got even a little bit of Irish, and it's your Irish. Yeah, there's so much power and magic in even the lands that we go to.
Hmm.
And that's also been a part of me reconnecting with my ancestral lineages, has been going to different parts of this earth because they carry different messages for us on that particular land and the spirits that are there.
Hmm.
And so I got the gift of being invited to go to a vision quest, the Humblecha, which is one of the sacred rites of the Lakota in Monterey, which is where my mother's family is from. And so
Mm.
that was a beautiful invitation to connect with our ancestral lands.
Yeah.
And I do believe that that was through prayer, that invitation came because people say, well, how do you get to these things? Like, how do you find these things?
Right, right. They find you.
They find you, yeah, with the intention and the prayer, and it they will you'll meet somebody unexpected along
Exactly.
the
Quote
pathway.
unquote, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like in the grocery store.
Yeah, it's totally
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. It just makes me think of how my like the soul or my soul, your soul has made these agreements at certain periods, maybe even before we came into this body, to have these experiences, to find each other at that grocery store at that time and be like, oh, I see you're wearing that bracelet. Actually, my mom's from that tribe, or and that starts the conversation, right? And like it those synchronicities and those mysteries and those miracles that seem to be so spontaneous are just so fascinating and so exciting for me to experience. And I love what Yogi Bhajan would say is that he doesn't believe in miracles, he relies on them.
Hmm.
It's like when we get to that space, that frequency, that alignment with spirit and with that prayer and sitting with that every day, it just opens up so much more of this reality and what is possible, and it's so much deeper than most people even imagine,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is really cool that we went there. you know?
Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool. Yeah. Yeah, and with these African traditions that have recently, I mean, it's been something that came into my life when I met my partner more consciously because he was practicing in this tradition, and it's fascinating. The what came up for me in one of the divinations was that I would carry multiple traditions, that I would carry these things that some people might not understand
Right.
or agree with, and that I might be faced with people having an issue with me carrying these different traditions. And so I'm just learning how to do that. And it's just, I'm this is me, this is what creator's given me, and I just want to continue to hold it all in the best way possible, and honor all of my teachers and ancestors and medicines that have allowed me to continue to come to this place. And what's fascinating was learning and within my blood and like my actual DNA, like these different these different carrying all of these beautiful, diverse formations of life continue to just speak to me through the journeys of medicine work. And my African ancestors came to me in a dieta in the Amazon.
Oh wow.
And I thought, okay, should I go on this journey right now? And I was seeking more healing and still struggling. And even though I'd been on a spiritual path, I was still struggling with addiction. And so I chose to go on a diet for a month, and that also reconnected me with through dreams with those ancestors. Uh,
Beautiful.
yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Angelica, for coming on today. It's been an amazing conversation, and it's been so great to reconnect with you. And I wanted to reflect back to you that the way that you walk and the way that you carry the medicines and the way that you show up for the community and for other people has been in a really beautiful way and a really good way. So thank you so much for the ways that you show up for the planet and follow your heart and follow spirit. That's really inspiring.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you
Uh,
for having me.
of
I
course, and
appreciate
you're
you.
welcome. You're welcome back anytime, and sending you so much love.
Ciao.
All right, take care.